I was a billionaire before marriage, but my husband took everything away from me and gave me HIV in return. I built my empire from the ground up. At 29, I was already listed among Africa's top 10 richest women. My name opened doors. My signature sealed deals worth millions. People called me the Golden Mind, the woman who saw opportunities where others saw risks. From Lagos to London, Dubai to New York, I owned fashion houses, real estate, and a charity foundation that funded education for underprivileged girls. I had everything: power, respect, and the kind of wealth that made even politicians take my calls before the first ring ended. But none of it came easy. I came from nothing, a one-room apartment in Surrey where rain leaked through the roof, and my mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. My father died before I turned 10, so I learned early that no one was coming to save me. I worked through university selling thrift clothes from my hostel room. What started as survival became an obsession, a hunger for more, for better, for everything they said I could never have. And I got it. My company, Amara Gold Couture, became a global name. I hired the best designers, built factories in Turkey and Italy, and launched stores in over 15 countries. Fashion weeks became my playground. Reporters loved my story, the girl from nothing who owned everything. I smiled for the cameras, gave motivational speeches, signed autographs, and played the perfect role model. But behind the gloss and glitter, there were nights I returned to an empty penthouse and cried quietly into my designer pillowcases. Because when you climb that high, the air gets lonely. People around me smiled, but their eyes always searched for a way to take. My friends wanted access to my lifestyle. My relatives wanted a share of my fortune. Every man who approached me saw a business opportunity. I was adored publicly but alone privately. Sometimes I'd sit by my massive window on the 37th floor, a glass of red wine in hand, watching the city lights dance below. I'd think of what my life would have been if my father were still alive, if I'd married young, if I'd chosen peace over power. But life never gave me both. Then one evening, after a business conference in Abuja, I met him. He wasn't like the others, or so I thought. No rehearsed compliments, no pretentious show of wealth. He looked at me as though he saw Amara, not Amara Kingsley. His voice was calm, his laughter deep, his words measured but warm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a trophy. I felt seen. If only I had known that the man who made me feel seen was already studying the cracks in my armor, waiting for the perfect moment to break me from the inside out. It was a humid evening in Abuja, the kind that carried the scent of rain and power in the air. I had just finished giving a keynote speech at a Women in Business summit. Cameras flashed as I descended the stage, reporters pushing microphones forward, asking questions about my next project, my secret to success, my thoughts on marriage. I gave them my practice smile, the one that never reached my eyes, and said, "Marriage will come when it finds me." It was a line I had used too many times, one that always drew polite laughter and headlines the next day. After the event, there was a private dinner for sponsors and keynote speakers at the Transcorp Hilton. I went out of obligation, not interest. Networking had become mechanical, the same handshakes, the same hollow compliments, the same men who either feared my success or wanted to feed off it. I was sitting at my table, scrolling through my phone when I heard a voice behind me. Smooth, calm, confident. "Forgive me for saying this, but you looked like you'd rather be anywhere but here." I turned around, ready to brush off whoever it was, but stopped. He wasn't what I expected. No expensive watch, no desperate smile, no flashy suit. Just a simple black tuxedo, neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that seemed to understand too much. "I'm not very good at pretending," I said, setting down my glass. He smiled. "Neither am I, which is probably why I'm standing here instead of sitting with those investors pretending to enjoy their forced laughter." That made me laugh, genuinely. It startled me how easy it was. He introduced himself as Michael Chaik, said he was an investment consultant, recently returned from South Africa. I had heard that name before, vaguely, connected to a few big financial firms. But there was something about the way he spoke that disarmed me. He didn't talk at me like most men did. He talked to me. We spent the rest of the evening in quiet conversation, away from the crowd. He asked about my work, not my money. He didn't seem intimidated by my achievements or obsessed with my fame. He listened, really listened. And when he smiled, it wasn't the calculated kind. It was the kind that reached his eyes and lingered just long enough to make my heart trip. When I finally checked my phone, it was almost midnight. The hall had mostly emptied out. I rose to leave. "It was nice talking to you," I said, slipping my clutch under my arm. He nodded. "Likewise, but I'd like to see you again, maybe somewhere less noisy." I hesitated. I didn't do this, dinners, calls, second meetings. I had built walls taller than my buildings. But something about his voice, the quiet certainty in it, made me nod before I could stop myself. As I walked out into the night, my heels clicking against the marble floor, I caught my reflection in the glass door smiling. A real smile. I didn't know it then, but that smile marked the beginning of the end. Michael was everything I thought I had been waiting for. He called the next morning, not to flatter or impress me, but just to ask if I made it back to my hotel safely. It was simple, thoughtful, and unexpected. That one call became 2, then 3, then daily conversations that stretched into the night. He listened when I spoke about work pressure, about loneliness, about my late father, things I rarely shared with anyone. He never asked for money, never bragged about his own achievements. He was humble but confident, kind but not weak. For once, I didn't feel like a boss trying to be loved. I felt like a woman being seen. Weeks turned into months. Every time he flew into Lagos, he brought me something small. A book he said reminded him of me, a bracelet from a local market, once even a handwritten note that read, "I'm proud of the woman you are. Never forget that." How could I not fall for him? He became the calm to my chaos. I began rearranging my schedule around his visits. The once busy, untouchable Amara started sneaking out of board meetings to answer his calls. My assistants noticed the change. They teased me gently, but I didn't care. He was perfect, too perfect. When my friends met him, they were skeptical. "He's charming," one of them said carefully, "but something about him feels studied." I laughed it off. They were used to men who chased me for my name or money. Michael was different, or so I believed. He blended into my life like he had always belonged there. He remembered the names of my staff, sent gifts to my mother, and even volunteered at my foundation once. The press called us Nigeria's new power couple, and for the first time in my life, I didn't mind the attention. One evening, after a charity gala, he took me to a quiet beach. The night was cold and the tide low. We sat on the sand, the sound of waves filling the silence between us. He looked at me with that same calm certainty that had drawn me in from the start. "I know what people think," he said softly. "That I'm after your money, your name, but I don't care about any of that. I just want you." And then he kissed me. Something inside me melted, all the caution, the fear, the years of building walls. In that moment, I let him in completely. It was love, or what I thought love was. Intense, consuming, blinding. I didn't see the little things. How he flinched when I asked too many questions about his business. How some of his stories changed each time he told them. How my staff whispered about his late-night phone calls. I was too far gone to notice the cracks. Because when you've spent years being strong, the first man who makes you feel safe doesn't have to be perfect. He just has to be patient enough to build your trust before he breaks it. It happened on a Saturday evening in Santorini, the kind of sunset that made the sky look like melted gold. We had flown there for what I thought was just a weekend getaway. Michael had insisted I take a break after months of back-to-back meetings. "You work too hard, Amara," he said. "Let someone take care of you for once." Those words alone were enough to make me close my laptop and pack my bags. The trip was perfect, suspiciously perfect. Breakfast in bed, long walks by the shore, late-night laughter over cheap wine and deep confessions. I remember thinking, this must be what peace feels like. On the third evening, he told me he had made dinner reservations at a cliffside restaurant. The view was breathtaking. A sea of lights dancing on the Aegean, soft music playing in the background, the smell of jasmine drifting through the air. Everything shimmered like a dream. Halfway through dinner, I noticed the waiters moving differently. The lights dimmed. Then the song changed, my favorite one. I looked around, confused, just as Michael rose from his chair and went down on one knee. For a moment, the world stopped. He looked up at me, eyes full of emotion, or what I thought was love, and said, "Amara Kingsley, I have never met a woman like you. You're strong, brilliant, and fearless, but beneath all that, you have the most beautiful heart I've ever known. You've built empires, but I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" The restaurant erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Someone screamed, "Say yes." I could barely breathe. My throat tightened, my heart raced. I saw the ring, a stunning diamond that caught every flicker of light, but more than the ring, I saw the man kneeling before me, the one who had loved me when everyone else only admired me from afar. "Yes," I whispered, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Yes, Michael, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring on my finger, stood up, and kissed me as fireworks exploded over the water. The crowd cheered, the cameras clicked, and somewhere between the noise and the lights, I thought to myself, I finally have it all. The next morning, our engagement was everywhere, on TV, blogs, magazines. "Africa's fashion queen finds her king," my mother called crying. My friends sent flowers. Even my competitors congratulated me. Everyone said I was lucky. But luck has a cruel sense of humor. Because while the world saw a fairy tale, I didn't realize I had just signed the first page of my tragedy. It was the wedding everyone talked about, the kind that shut down social media and made headlines across continents. #Amara and Michael 2020 trended for weeks. Every magazine wanted exclusive coverage, every designer begged to dress me, and every influencer dreamed of an invitation. They called it the wedding of the year, a union of love, power, and elegance. The ceremony took place at a private estate in Tuscany, surrounded by rolling hills and vineyards that glowed under the Italian sun. My dress was hand-stitched by Dior, delicate lace, soft pearls, and a 10-foot train that shimmered like a river of light. The veil alone cost more than most people's homes. But that day, I didn't care about cost. I cared about the feeling. As I stood in front of the mirror, my heart racing, my makeup artist said softly, "You look like a dream, ma'am." I smiled. Today I'm a dream. Outside, guests from all over the world filled the seats, politicians, celebrities, business magnates, and even royal figures. Cameras hovered like dragonflies, catching every glittering second. The orchestra played softly as I began my walk down the aisle. And there he was. Michael, standing tall in a white tuxedo, eyes fixed on me like I was the only person in the world. His smile was steady, reassuring, the kind that made the crowd sigh. My mother wept. My best friend squeezed my hand. For a moment, everything felt still. When I reached him, he whispered, "You're breathtaking." And I whispered back, "Don't make me cry." The vows were perfect. His voice trembled with emotion as he spoke of loyalty, of forever, of protecting my heart like it was his own. I believed every word. When it was my turn, I promised to stand by him through everything, in wealth or in want, in health or in sickness. I didn't know then how deeply those words would be tested. When the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," the crowd erupted. Confetti filled the air, white doves soared, and the choir broke into song. It was magical, the kind of moment fairy tales are made of. The reception was even grander. 1,000 guests, a 7-tier cake, champagne fountains, and a live performance by one of the biggest artists in the world. Michael held my hand the entire night, introducing me as the woman who changed his life. I glowed with pride, love, and certainty. We danced under the stars as fireworks burst above us, his arm around my waist, his lips close to my ear. He whispered, "This is the beginning of forever." I smiled and whispered back, "Forever." But forever came faster than I expected, and not in the way I dreamed. Because while the world saw beauty, grace, and love that day, what I didn't see were the shadows behind his smile, the calm cruelty hiding beneath his vows. And that night, as we boarded the private jet for our honeymoon, I didn't realize I had just walked down the aisle and straight into a cage, one built not with bars, but with trust. It started subtly, so subtly that I almost missed it. The first few months of marriage were blissful. We honeymooned in the Maldives, then spent a month touring Europe. Every morning, I woke up beside the man I believed was my soulmate. He made breakfast, held me close, and called me my peace. I laughed more in those weeks than I had in years. When we returned home to Lagos, the house staff welcomed us with flowers and music. I remember thinking, this is it. This is happiness. But happiness doesn't last forever, not when it's built on lies. The first shift came with a suggestion. "Baby, you work too much," Michael said one night as we ate dinner by the pool. "You have people for everything, let them handle things. You deserve rest." It sounded loving, thoughtful, but slowly rest became restriction. He started asking me to cancel business meetings, saying he missed me. He wanted to spend more time together, and I obliged. Love makes you compromise. When I insisted on attending a major fashion conference in Paris, he frowned slightly. "Don't you trust your team? Must you always be everywhere?" I laughed it off, unaware that he was laying the first brick of my isolation. Then came the security changes. He said my old bodyguards made him uncomfortable, that they didn't seem loyal. Without asking me, he replaced them with his own men who barely looked at me without his permission. My personal assistant of 5 years, Nena, suddenly resigned after Michael accused her of overstepping boundaries. "I'm only protecting you," he said when I confronted him. And because he said it softly and kissed me afterward, I believed him. My mother noticed the difference first. During one of her visits, she whispered, "You don't laugh the same anymore, Amara." I smiled. "I'm just tired, Mama." But even as I said it, I could feel the truth gnawing at me. I was tired of tiptoeing around the man I once thought was gentle. His temper had begun to flare in strange ways. If a waiter spilled wine, he'd snap. If I took too long to reply to his message, he'd go silent for hours. He started going through my phone for transparency. He changed the passwords to our joint accounts for safety. When I asked why, he smiled and said, "You're my wife. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine." The charm was still there, but beneath it, I started to see something darker. One night, while he slept, I looked at him, the same man who once made me feel safe, and felt something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe sadness, maybe both. The shift had begun, and though I couldn't see the full storm yet, I could already feel the wind picking up, slow, cold, and deliberate. The real manipulation began quietly, like poison slipped into a sweet drink. By then, 6 months had passed since the wedding. To everyone else, Michael and I were still the picture of perfection, smiling at events, holding hands at galas, giving interviews about balancing love and success. But behind those curated smiles, he was rewriting the story of us in ways I didn't yet understand. It started with money. Michael had a way of talking that made you feel foolish for disagreeing. "Babe, you handle so much already," he'd say, voice soft, eyes tender. "Let me take care of the financial side. You've worked all your life, relax, let me help manage things." He called it help, I called it love. Soon he was attending board meetings with me, then without me. My CFO said he'd been requesting confidential reports directly. "He's my husband," I told her. "It's fine." It was. Gradually, I noticed my authority slipping. My signature was being used on documents I hadn't seen. New faces joined the company, all trusted associates Michael personally recommended. When I questioned one of the decisions, he smiled and said, "You signed it, remember?" I didn't, but his calm tone made me doubt myself. He was patient, calculated. Every control he took, he wrapped in affection. "Babe, I've transferred some of your shares to a joint account," he said one evening, pouring me wine. "It's for legal convenience. In case anything happens, I can handle things faster. You trust me, don't you?" Of course I did. I'd married him. He began inserting himself into every part of my life, business, family, friendships. He would accidentally overhear my calls, then later comment on them. "Your friend Talou doesn't really like you, you know," he'd say. She's jealous, watch her. And slowly I did. He planted doubts so subtly that soon I started cutting people off myself. My circle grew smaller, my voice quieter, my confidence weaker. At home, he praised me in public but corrected me in private. "You shouldn't say things like that in front of people," he'd whisper after interviews. "It makes you look arrogant." At first, I defended myself. Then I stopped. Because each argument ended the same way, his calm words slicing through my emotions until I ended up apologizing for something he did. He knew exactly how to break me, not with fists, but with logic that made me question my sanity. The final blow came when he suggested merging our businesses. "It's symbolic," he said, his thumb stroking my hand. "We're one in every way. Why should our companies be separate?" I hesitated. My lawyer advised against it. "Madam, keep your finances distinct," she said firmly. But Michael held me that night, whispered, "You don't trust me?" And I felt my resolve crumble. I signed the documents the next day, smiling for the cameras as the press celebrated our merger of love and legacy. That was the day I unknowingly handed him the keys to everything I had built and locked myself out of my own empire. The manipulation was complete. And the saddest part, I still believed he was doing it all because he loved me. It didn't happen all at once. It came in waves. Gentle at first, then fierce enough to drown me. After the merger, Michael's control tightened. What used to feel like partnership slowly turned into quiet possession. He began making decisions on our behalf without even mentioning them to me. Staff were fired, new ones hired, all loyal to him. My driver, who had worked with me for 8 years, suddenly left. "Personal reasons," he said, but I saw the fear in his eyes as he handed in his resignation letter. Soon, I realized I didn't recognize half the people in my own home. He started changing routines. My visits to the office became unnecessary stress. He said I needed to rest more, delegate more, live softer. It sounded reasonable, caring, even. But each day I spent away from work, another piece of my identity faded. My friends noticed. They stopped calling as often because I rarely answered. When they did reach out, Michael always seemed to have a reason I couldn't meet them. "Babe, Talou wants to hang out again. Didn't she gossip about you last year? Do you really need to go to that event? It's full of fake people who only use you. Stay home, let's have dinner, just us." It felt like protection, but it was isolation disguised as love. Then it extended to my family. My mother once came to visit and waited 2 hours at the gate before being let in. When I confronted Michael about it, he shrugged. "I told them not to allow surprise visits. You need peace, Amara. Everyone wants something from you." That night, I cried in the bathroom, quietly, so he wouldn't hear. Because I didn't understand when love had become surveillance, when care had become control. He had changed the passwords to our accounts for security reasons. My phone was now synced with his for convenience. My emails were monitored. My calls sometimes mysteriously dropped mid-conversation when he entered the room. The staff now reported to him, not me. When I gave instructions, they hesitated, waiting for his approval. Once, I heard my chef whisper, "Ask Olga first. Madam, no day decide again." That broke something inside me. One night, I tried to speak up. "Michael, I feel like I'm losing myself," I said quietly as we sat in the living room. He smiled, leaned forward, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're not losing yourself, my love. You're becoming who you were meant to be, peaceful, rested, loved." His words were soft, but his eyes were sharp. I wanted to believe him, but the room suddenly felt smaller. The next week, my best friend sent a message. "Amara, are you okay? You've disappeared. You don't sound like yourself anymore." I stared at the text for a long time before replying. "I'm fine." But I was. Because by then, my empire no longer belonged to me. My friends no longer reached me. And my life, my beautiful, carefully built life, was now a gilded cage with his name carved on every wall. I was surrounded by people, yet completely alone. It started with a message I never expected to see, a photo that froze my heart mid-beat. I had returned home early one evening from a business trip to London. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet. I assumed Michael was resting, but when I reached our bedroom, I found his phone lying carelessly on the bed. A message notification flashed on the screen. Curiosity overpowered me. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The photo was of him in a hotel room, laughing with a woman I didn't know. The caption beneath it wasn't subtle. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I felt my knees weaken. My stomach turned. My mind raced, trying to deny the evidence, trying to find some twisted explanation that would make this a mistake. But deep down, I knew. I confronted him that night. My voice trembled, though I tried to keep it steady. "Michael, who is she?" He looked at me, calm, collected, unflinching. And that was the first moment I realized the man I had loved so blindly was capable of cruelty I couldn't have imagined. "She's someone I met. It doesn't mean anything," he said, his voice smooth, almost practiced. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Doesn't mean anything. The texts, the pictures, the hotel bills, how does that not mean anything?" He reached for my hand. "Amara, listen, you don't understand. I didn't want to hurt you." But the look in his eyes said the opposite. In the days that followed, the truth unfolded piece by piece. Bills for fancy dinners I wasn't invited to. Receipts for gifts I never received. His late nights at meetings that led to strange hotel addresses and untraceable transactions. He had built a parallel life, one that existed entirely without me, yet right under my nose. And then came the final blow, the confirmation from a private investigator I had hesitantly hired. It wasn't just infidelity. It was deliberate. He had taken what I trusted most, my marriage, my heart, my wealth, and was dismantling it quietly while keeping me convinced I was loved. I remember staring at the investigator's report, hands shaking, mouth dry. Everything I built, gone. That night, he didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. Instead, he leaned back in our bed, arms behind his head, and said with a calm smile, "You gave me everything willingly, Amara. Don't act surprised." And in that moment, I realized the worst betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the realization that you were blind while it happened, that the person you loved most planned it all from the very beginning. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was utterly, painfully alone, stripped of trust, love, and security, with the man I had adored sitting beside me, smug in his deception. I waited until that night, when the penthouse was silent and the city lights flickered below us, before I finally confronted him. Michael was in the living room, casually scrolling through his phone, the same calm expression he always wore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions boiling inside me: anger, disbelief, betrayal, and a searing hurt I couldn't put into words. "Michael," I said, my voice shaking, "I know everything." He looked up slowly, as if surprised I had said anything. "Everything?" he asked, tilting his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Do tell me what that is." I walked toward him, clutching the investigator's report in my hands. My fingers trembled, but my gaze didn't waver. "The photos, the messages, the hotel bills, the dinners, the gifts, the women you've been lying to me about. I know you've been cheating. I know you've been manipulating me, my money, my company, my life." He leaned back, hands behind his head, almost amused. "Manipulating, cheating." His voice was casual, like I was overreacting. "Amara, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I snapped, throwing the report onto the coffee table. Papers fluttered everywhere. "I trusted you with my life, my wealth, my heart, and you've been living a double life the whole time. Do you have any idea what this feels like?" He sighed, finally standing, and for a moment I thought I saw guilt flicker across his features. But then it was gone. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said softly. "I just wanted what I deserved." "What you deserved?" I echoed, disbelief coloring every word. "You mean taking everything from me while pretending to love me? That's what you deserved." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're angry because you finally see the truth, but you should have known love isn't always kind, Amara. Sometimes people take what they want, and I wanted it all." I felt my chest tighten, rage mixed with despair. My voice cracked as I spat out the words I'd been holding back for months. You planned this. You manipulated me from the start. Everything, the smiles, the tenderness, the promises, it was all a trap. He didn't deny it. He simply nodded, almost proudly. Yes, I planned it, and you fell for it. You gave me everything willingly. I stared at him, the room spinning around me. My empire, my trust, my love, all of it had been stolen, and the man I had loved most in the world was the thief. For the first time, I felt the full weight of betrayal. Not just heartbreak, a cold, suffocating realization that the life I thought I had built with him was a lie, and that lie had been constructed around my own love and trust. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. I didn't even know if I could survive the truth. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. That night was like a storm I couldn't escape. I came home early from a late meeting, hoping to catch him for a quiet dinner, maybe salvage the remnants of our life. But when I entered the bedroom, the scene stopped me cold. Michael was there with her, a woman I didn't know, smiling, laughing as if our entire life together were a joke. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, my body refusing to move. He didn't even try to hide it. In fact, he looked at me almost expectantly, as if daring me to react. Amara, he said, his voice soft, almost soothing. I can explain. But there was no explanation that could undo the betrayal. I felt the pain physically, as if someone had ripped my chest open. My knees buckled. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to break everything around me. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring, numb. The woman left quietly, shooting me a smirk over her shoulder. Michael didn't follow her out. He just watched me, waiting for my reaction. When I finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. Why? Because I can, he said simply. Because you gave me everything, your wealth, your trust, your life. And I wanted more. I wanted to run, but the shock pinned me in place. I wanted to cry, but my tears had dried up after months of being manipulated, isolated, and doubted. Then came the realization that hurt more than her presence. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was deliberate, a pattern, a choice. And I had been blind, trusting, loving the very man who had been dismantling my life piece by piece. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the cold floor of our penthouse, staring at the city lights below. My body shook with rage, but beneath it all, there was a deeper pain. The understanding that the man I had called my soulmate had not only cheated on me, but had done so with calculated precision. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, I felt hollow, betrayed, broken, but somewhere in that emptiness, a small ember of resolve flickered. He thought he had destroyed me, but he had only awakened the part of me that refused to be a victim. And that night of pain would be the first step toward reclaiming everything he had taken. It started quietly, small things that I tried to ignore at first. A persistent fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. Sudden fevers that came and went without warning. Night sweats that soaked my expensive silk sheets. I brushed it off, blaming stress, overwork, even the climate. After all, I had survived worse. But then the weight of it became undeniable. My body ached in ways it never had before, and even climbing the steps of my penthouse felt exhausting. I began forgetting meetings, missing calls, and losing focus, things that were impossible before. My staff noticed, whispering behind closed doors. Finally, I went to the doctor. At first, routine tests suggested nothing serious. But then, one afternoon, the nurse returned with a solemn expression and said, "We need to run another test. Something doesn't add up." I felt a chill creep up my spine. Something in her eyes told me this wasn't routine. The results came back a few days later. I remember the moment vividly: the sterile office, the quiet hum of the air conditioner, and the doctor's hesitant gaze. You are HIV positive," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Time seemed to stop. I stared at him, unable to form words. My mind raced, confusion, denial, disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. I had been careful. I had trusted the wrong person, but this. When I got home, the city lights outside the penthouse no longer shone with warmth. They mocked me with their brilliance. I sat alone in the living room, the report trembling in my hands. Every memory of Michael, every smile, every whispered promise, every kiss twisted into a weapon. I remembered the hotel bills, the messages, the women. And now this, the final, cruel betrayal. I felt anger flare, sharp and raw. But beneath it, there was fear. A deep, gnawing fear that this disease would change everything: my body, my career, my life, my very existence. And in that moment, I realized that the man I had loved most had not only stolen my wealth and my trust, but had also taken my health as payment for his deception. The sickness wasn't just physical. It was the embodiment of his betrayal, coursing through my veins, leaving me to wonder if I could ever recover, or if my life, the life I had built from nothing, had truly ended. The day I discovered the truth behind the virus was the day my world shattered all over again. I had been living with the diagnosis for 3 months, trying to come to terms with the reality of it. I followed every instruction: medications, regular checkups, strict diets, but the questions in my heart never stopped echoing. How? Why? When? One afternoon, I sat in the clinic, waiting for another round of blood work. My doctor, a calm, compassionate woman named Dr. Tessa, looked at me for a long time before saying quietly, "Amara, can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "Have you been intimate with anyone other than your husband in the last year?" Her question stung, but I answered truthfully, "No, never." She sighed, folding her hands. "Then I think you deserve to know something." She hesitated before continuing. "Your husband came to this same clinic 2 years ago. He tested positive for HIV and refused treatment. He signed a confidentiality waiver, but I can confirm he was aware of his status long before your diagnosis." I froze, my lips parted, but no sound came out. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "He knew," I whispered. Dr. Tessa nodded sadly. "He knew, Amara, and he didn't tell you." The world around me blurred. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. My husband, the man I had loved, defended, forgiven, had knowingly infected me. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was evil. When I got home, I confronted him immediately. When I got home, I confronted him immediately. He was pouring himself a drink, calm as ever. "You went to see your doctor again?" he asked without looking up. "How long have you known?" My voice was sharp, trembling with rage. He turned then, smiling faintly. "Known what?" "Don't play games with me, Michael," I screamed, tears burning my eyes. "You knew you were HIV positive before we got married. You knew, and you still touched me, slept with me, pretended to love me." He didn't even flinch. He took a slow sip of his drink and said coldly, "Of course I knew." The words hit me like a punch. I took a step back, shaking. Why? Why would you do this to me?" He laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Because you had everything. The money, the fame, the power. I wanted to watch you lose it all, just like you made me feel small when I was nothing. You thought love made us equal, but it didn't. Now we're the same, broken, infected, ruined." I stared at him in disbelief, horror flooding every part of me. This wasn't love. It never had been. It was revenge, carefully planned, patiently executed. He hadn't just wanted my wealth. He wanted my destruction. That night, I packed my bags and walked out of the home I had once called my sanctuary. The rain poured heavily, soaking me to the skin, but I didn't care. I kept walking away from the man who had poisoned my life and toward whatever strength was left inside me. Because even though he had taken everything, he hadn't taken my will to survive. And from that night forward, I vowed that my story wouldn't end with his cruelty. It would begin with my rise. The disgrace didn't come immediately. It crept in like a shadow, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. News of my diagnosis leaked, I don't know how, but the tabloids had it within hours. "Fashion queen infected, billionaire bride betrayed," screamed one headline. Another read, "Amara Kingsley, from riches to ruin." Social media erupted with speculation, judgment, and cruel memes. Friends I had trusted vanished. Business associates sent polite condolences, then stopped returning calls. The world I had built so meticulously was crumbling. Not just because of Michael, but because everyone else suddenly wanted to see me fall. Even my closest friends questioned me. Texts came. "Are you sure about the story? Maybe you did something." Another. "Be careful what you post, people are talking." The whispers in hallways, the side glances, the cold nods, it all cut deeper than any betrayal from Michael could. At board meetings, investors avoided eye contact. Employees hesitated to approach me, unsure if I could still lead. The media painted me as reckless, careless, as if my illness was a scandal I had brought upon myself. Every photo, every article, every comment chipped away at my dignity. Even charity events became unbearable. Guests who once admired me now whispered behind my back. The applause that used to greet me faded into polite claps. Invitations stopped arriving. The world that had celebrated me now mocked me quietly, cruelly, from every corner. And Michael, he stood there, smiling in public, attending gala dinners with his new lovers, untouched by the storm he had created. My pain became his armor, my disgrace became his victory. I remember sitting alone one night in the penthouse, staring at the skyline, the city lights taunting me with their brilliance. I had built an empire from nothing, only to watch it crumble, not entirely because of illness, not entirely because of betrayal, but because the world was quick to judge and slow to understand. I cried silently, but beneath the tears, a flicker of resolve sparked. They could try to disgrace me, to humiliate me, to erase me from their glittering society, but no headline, no rumor, no judgment could destroy what truly mattered: my will to survive. Even in disgrace, I was still Amara Kingsley, and that fact no one could take away. The fall from grace was not sudden. It was a slow, excruciating unraveling of everything I had built. Once I had commanded boardrooms with a single word, made deals worth millions, and walked red carpets with the confidence of a queen. Now, I struggled to open doors without feeling the weight of judgment pressing down on me. My empire, which had been my pride and my fortress, felt like a crumbling palace. Investors hesitated to sign contracts, sponsors withdrew from campaigns, and major clients found other partners. My fashion houses remained open, but sales plummeted. Employees whispered in corners, unsure if I could still lead. People I had considered friends stopped returning calls. Even my charity, the pride of my heart, received less funding and fewer volunteers. Everywhere I went, I could feel the invisible stigma clinging to me. Guests at events avoided eye contact. Invitations I had once received with ease now never arrived. Headlines that once praised my brilliance now labeled me reckless, infected, and ruined. The public, who had once admired my rise from nothing to everything, now saw me as a cautionary tale. They gossiped about my illness, speculated about my finances, and celebrated Michael's freedom while mourning my downfall. At home, the penthouse that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. My belongings, the expensive jewelry, designer dresses, luxury cars, no longer brought joy. They were reminders of a life that had been stolen from me, piece by piece, by a man I had trusted completely. I spent nights staring at the city lights, wondering how it all went so wrong. The woman who had commanded empires now felt powerless, trapped under the weight of betrayal, illness, and societal judgment. Yet amid the despair, a quiet determination began to grow. I may have fallen from grace in the eyes of the world, but inside me, a fire was still burning. If I could survive betrayal and disease, I could survive this too. The fall hurt, but it would not define me, not completely. Because even at my lowest, I knew one truth: I was still alive. And as long as I was alive, I could rise again. In the midst of my darkest days, when betrayal, illness, and public shame had stripped me of almost everything, I didn't realize I wasn't entirely alone. It started subtly. A message on my phone from an unknown number. "Amara, I think we can help each other. Trust me." I nearly deleted it, assuming it was a scam or a cruel prank. But something in the tone, calm, confident, knowledgeable, made me pause. The sender introduced herself as Ngozi, a former associate of one of Michael's old business partners. She had followed his moves quietly for years, aware of his manipulative ways and the destruction he left behind in every life he touched. She reached out not just with sympathy, but with a plan. Ngozi became my eyes and ears in the world I had once ruled. She provided documents I didn't have access to, connections I had lost, and intelligence about Michael's schemes. With her help, I began to understand just how meticulously he had orchestrated my downfall, and more importantly, how to fight back. It was awkward at first. I had been betrayed so deeply that trusting anyone felt dangerous. Yet Ngozi was patient. She didn't promise miracles, she only offered strategy and guidance. "You may have been blindsided," she said one evening over encrypted messages, "but he underestimated your resilience. He forgot the woman who built an empire from nothing." Slowly, I started to rebuild, quietly, carefully. Ngozi connected me with lawyers who specialized in corporate recovery. She linked me to medical experts who could manage my illness with discretion and care. She reminded me of the value I still possessed: my mind, my instincts, and my unbreakable spirit. She became more than an ally, she became a lifeline. I shared with her the moments I feared I couldn't survive, and she reminded me why I had to. Every setback, every whisper of shame became a challenge we faced together. And in that partnership, I realized something crucial. Michael might have taken my wealth, my trust, even my health, but he could not touch my mind. He could not extinguish my ability to fight back. With Ngozi by my side, I began to see a path forward, one where I wasn't just surviving, but slowly reclaiming what had been stolen from me. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Because even in betrayal, there could be loyalty. Even in darkness, an ally could shine. And I was ready to follow that light. The road to healing was nothing like the fairy tales I had imagined as a child. There were no shortcuts, no sudden bursts of magic that made the pain disappear. It was slow, grueling, and sometimes painfully lonely, but it was mine. The first step was accepting the truth. I could no longer hide from the betrayal, the illness, or the loss of my empire. Each morning, I woke up and faced my reflection in the mirror, staring into the woman who had been broken and realizing she was still there, bruised, yes, but alive. That acknowledgement alone was a small victory. Therapy became my sanctuary. For hours, I poured out grief, rage, shame, and fear, letting someone else hold it for me so I could begin to process what had happened. Ngozi, my hidden ally, remained my steady support, guiding me through the practical steps of reclaiming my life, but the emotional scars needed professional care. I also focused on my body. My health had been attacked, my immunity weakened, and my spirit fatigued. Exercise became therapy, not vanity. I trained, I ran, I pushed my body to remember strength. Nutrition, meditation, and disciplined routines slowly restored a sense of control I thought I had lost forever. Then came the financial rebuilding. With Ngozi's network and a team of trusted advisors, I began untangling Michael's manipulations. Each recovered account, each reclaimed contract, each loyal employee who returned was a reminder that I was still capable of creating, leading, and succeeding. But the hardest part was reclaiming trust in people, in love, and most importantly, in myself. I had been deceived by the man I had loved most, and the world had judged me harshly for it. Learning to trust my instincts again, to make decisions without fear of manipulation, became an essential part of my healing. Slowly, life regained color. I laughed without guilt, celebrated small victories, and allowed myself moments of joy that weren't tainted by fear or betrayal. I even returned to fashion, designing a collection inspired by resilience, bold, unapologetic, and beautiful in its imperfections. The road was long, winding, and full of obstacles, but every step forward reminded me of a truth I had nearly forgotten. Pain doesn't define you. How you rise after it does. And with every sunrise, I reclaimed a piece of the life Michael had tried to destroy. By the time I looked back, I realized I wasn't just healed. I was stronger, wiser, and more alive than I had ever been. The road to healing didn't erase the past. It transformed it, and I had survived. The revelation came when I least expected it, a moment so sharp it cut through all the fog of anger, betrayal, and pain I had been carrying. It was late evening. I had been reviewing the latest reports on the recovery of my businesses, feeling a quiet sense of pride for the first time in months. Ngozi was by my side, going over financial statements and legal documents, when she paused and looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "Amara," she said softly, "there's something you need to know about Michael, something bigger than the money, bigger than the betrayal." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She handed me a folder filled with correspondence, bank transfers, and hidden contracts, evidence of Michael's schemes not just against me, but against multiple people over the years. He hadn't just destroyed me. He had built a secret empire of manipulation, deceit, and exploitation, leaving ruin in his wake wherever he went. And then the shock hit me like a punch. Among the documents were records proving that he had knowingly infected not just me, but at least one other partner before me. He had lived with the virus, hiding it meticulously, and repeated the cycle of betrayal without remorse. I felt my chest tighten. My hands shook as I processed the magnitude of his cruelty. Every smile, every gesture of tenderness I had cherished was now tainted. Every memory felt like a carefully constructed lie. Ngozi placed a hand on my shoulder. "He underestimated you, Amara. He thought his manipulation would last forever, but look at you, you're still standing. And now, you have the proof to reclaim everything he took." Tears blurred my vision, but this time, they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of clarity, of understanding, and of newfound power. The revelation wasn't just about what he had done to me. It was about seeing the full scope of the man I had loved and realizing the strength it would take to bring him down. In that moment, I understood something crucial. Betrayal may have taken much from me, but the truth gave me back something even stronger: knowledge, strategy, and the determination to rise beyond the man who had tried to destroy me. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't just a victim. I was a force, and Michael's carefully built world of lies was about to collide with mine. The comeback wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, precise, the way only someone who had been shattered and rebuilt could move. Months had passed since the revelation, and by then I had mastered the art of silence. While the world still whispered about my fall, I was building something new, something stronger, smarter, and untouchable. With Ngozi's help, I founded a new company, A&K Revival Group, a name that blended my old initials with a quiet nod to rebirth. I didn't announce it publicly. No press conferences, no social media buzz. I worked behind the scenes, gathering a small circle of loyal professionals who believed in my vision, people who didn't see me as a scandal, but as a survivor. We started small: community empowerment projects, mentorship for women in business, HIV awareness campaigns, all designed not just to rebuild my name, but to reclaim my purpose. For the first time, my success wasn't about luxury or status. It was about meaning. But then came the moment the world could no longer ignore me. My designs, a collection called Resurgence, debuted at a major fashion gala in Lagos. I hadn't planned to attend, but Ngozi insisted. "They need to see you," she said. "The woman who rose from ashes." When I walked into that hall, the crowd fell silent. Cameras flashed, whispers rippled, some in awe, some in disbelief. I could feel their eyes on me, the same eyes that had once watched me crumble. But I didn't look away. I smiled, calm, radiant, unbothered. The show began. One by one, the models walked out wearing pieces that told my story: strength woven into silk, forgiveness embroidered in gold, and resilience stitched into every seam. Each design carried a message: I am still here. When the final model stepped out, wearing a gown made of translucent fabric that shimmered like healing light, the audience rose in applause. For the first time in a long time, I felt the warmth of admiration without judgment. Not pity, respect. And then, as the lights dimmed, a journalist asked me, "Amara, after everything, how did you find the strength to return?" I smiled, steady and sure. "You don't find strength," I said quietly. "You become it." That night, as I stood backstage, tears in my eyes and pride swelling in my chest, I realized something profound. My story was no longer about betrayal, loss, or disease. It was about resurrection. Michael had taken my wealth, my reputation, and nearly my life, but he had unknowingly given me something far more powerful: purpose. And as the cameras flashed and my name began trending again, not as a scandal, but as a symbol of survival, I whispered to myself, "This is my comeback." The final justice didn't come with shouting or spectacle. It came quietly, efficiently, and with the weight of every truth I had uncovered. By then, Michael had grown arrogant. He believed I was still the broken woman he had left behind, a cautionary tale he could ignore. He didn't see me coming. Ngozi and I had meticulously gathered evidence. Every fraudulent transaction, every hidden account, every deceitful move he had made to control, manipulate, and harm me. We had testimonies from former partners, staff, and even women he had tried to ensnare. Everything he had done in the shadows was now documented and undeniable. The day the lawsuit was filed, I felt no anger, only resolve. My lawyers presented the evidence with precision, exposing every lie, every betrayal, and every calculated act of cruelty. Michael could no longer charm his way out. The courts could no longer be swayed by his charisma. Then came the public reckoning. The media reported on the legal proceedings, not as gossip, but as fact. The same tabloids that once mocked me now chronicled the downfall of the man who had destroyed lives with impunity. The verdict was clear. Michael was stripped of every asset he had attempted to hide, ordered to provide restitution, and banned from controlling or accessing any of my business interests. He faced criminal charges for knowingly transmitting HIV, fraud, and financial manipulation. I watched from the courtroom gallery, calm, composed, and finally free. He was angry, defeated, and publicly humiliated, a man who once wielded power over my life, now powerless in the eyes of the law and the world. Outside the courthouse, supporters, friends, and even some former critics approached me. They offered congratulations, apologies, and admiration, but I barely noticed. My eyes were on the horizon, not on the crowd. That night I returned home alone, not lonely, but whole. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the balcony overlooking the city, and let the cool night air wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt unshackled. Justice had been served. Not just in the courtroom, but in every step I had taken to reclaim my life, my health, my reputation, and my spirit. Michael had tried to break me, but in the end, it was I who had risen stronger. And as the city lights twinkled below, I whispered to the night, "This is the end of your reign, Michael, and the beginning of my forever." Weeks passed after the verdict, and life slowly began to feel normal again, though normal now meant something entirely new. I poured my energy back into rebuilding my empire, not from a place of greed or pride, but purpose. I founded the Amara Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting women living with HIV and survivors of domestic and financial abuse. My pain had become my platform, and my scars, my testimony. The same business world that once turned its back on me now invited me to speak on resilience, ethics, and empowerment. Reporters wanted interviews. Magazines wanted my story. But this time, I spoke on my terms. Michael's name began to fade from the headlines, replaced by stories of what I was creating. His downfall was complete, my rise unstoppable. One morning, as I walked into the new headquarters of my foundation, the glass doors reflected my image, strong, poised, alive. I smiled softly. That reflection wasn't the billionaire who once had everything. It was the woman who had lost everything and found herself. Later that evening, I visited the small garden behind my home, my sanctuary. The flowers bloomed freely, untouched by the past. I sat on the bench, watching the sunset bleed into gold. And for the first time in years, I whispered a prayer, not of revenge, but of gratitude. Gratitude for survival. For strength. For the quiet justice of time. Because in the end, Michael took my wealth, my pride, and nearly my life, but he couldn't take my spirit. And that, I realized, was the true victory. Years passed, and the scars of my past slowly became the marks of my strength. The newspapers that once printed my downfall now printed my rebirth. I didn't chase headlines anymore. They came naturally, drawn to the quiet fire of a woman who refused to stay broken. The Amara Foundation grew beyond my imagination. What started as a safe space for women became a global movement, one that offered hope, healthcare, education, and empowerment. I saw lives change. I saw women who had been silent for years stand tall and speak. Each one reminded me that my pain had not been wasted. It had simply been repurposed. My health stabilized. I learned to care for my body as tenderly as I cared for my dreams. I traveled, not for business, but for peace. I spent mornings walking through lavender fields in France, afternoons writing by the ocean, and nights beneath starry skies that whispered of second chances. Sometimes people ask if I ever loved again. The truth is I did, but differently. I fell in love with peace first, with laughter, with the simple joy of being alive. And eventually, love found me again, not in grand gestures or perfect promises, but in kindness, patience, and truth. He came quietly into my life, not to rescue me, but to walk beside me. He saw my scars and called them beautiful. With him, I learned that love can heal instead of harm, that trust can be gentle, and that partnership doesn't mean surrender, it means balance. I live now in a home filled with light, glass walls, open gardens, soft music, and laughter. Sometimes I catch my reflection and see not the billionaire I once was, nor the woman who lost everything, but someone reborn, someone free. I am Amara Kingsley. I was broken, betrayed, and nearly destroyed. But today, I am whole living proof that after the darkest night, the sun always finds its way back.